The second part of 7.1 is another kind of question that I give a special kind of name. I call these ones multi-revolution questions. And we'll see why we call it that in a second. So the main difference in this question compared to questions that we had before is you're solving for something, and inside it's not just theta, it's not just x. We have sine of 3x equals 0. So a couple of things that this does. The 3, we know from transformations, that's a horizontal compression. Everything has been compressed. So what that does as a result is normally when you're solving between 0 and 2 pi, you would have 2 answers. But now your period has been compressed by a third, you're going to get a lot more answers. So what we're going to do as a setup is we're going to say, well, if 1x is between 0 and 2 pi, 3x's would be between 0 and 6 pi. It's kind of like this. If you picked a number between 1 and 10, and then I said multiply it by 3, everybody's numbers would be between 3 and 30 after multiplying it by 3. So you started with a number between 1 and 10. Then when you multiply by 3, you'll have a number between 3 and 30. The same thing happens here. If we're looking for x between 0 and 2 pi, well, that would mean we'd have to look for 3x between 0 and 6 pi. And so what we do when we solve this is we solve this as if this just was a theta. If it was just a theta, if you had, and don't write this down, but if we had sine theta equals 0, when does that happen? When is your y-coordinate equal to 0? At 0 and pi and 2 pi, right? That's how you would solve it if it was just a theta. If this was just a theta, what did I replace? I replaced the 3x with theta. I would have to look between 0 and 6 pi. So we would have to keep on going. What we're going to write when we solve this is we're going to imagine this is just a funny looking theta, or it's 3x, and we're going to start by saying 3x is equal to. And it's equal to 0. When is your y-coordinate equal to 0? At 0. It's equal to pi. It's equal to 2 pi. But that's only once around the circle. And if x is from 0 to 2 pi, then 3x's is 3 times around the circle. So we think, first time around the circle I got 0, pi, and 2 pi. The second time around the circle I'd have to add 3 pi and 4 pi. The third time around the circle I'd have to add 5 pi and 6 pi. And I just realized I did a tiny typo from the question to the work that I've done. Can you see my small typo? Okay. It's not equal to 2 pi, so I'd have to take that out and that out. And as a result, I'd have to take out 6 pi. Now, to solve for x, because what we just did was we just solved for 3x. But the question doesn't say solve for 3x, it says solve, and when a question says solve, it's solving for the variable that's there. We need to solve for x. How can I solve for x? Well, if 3x is equal to 0, then x is equal to 0. If 3x is equal to pi, you would divide both sides by 3, and you would get pi over 3. So basically we're dividing all of our answers, and I'll just write this one as 3 pi over 3 even though I can simplify it. We're just dividing all of our answers by 3. In the end, we get a number of answers, and all of our answers are between 0 and 2 pi. Part B, what's the general solution? Well, the general solution says take all of your answers, it's not theta, it's x. Take all of your answers from 0 to 2 pi, and we have a lot of them. 0, pi over 3, 2 pi over 3, 3 pi over 3, 4 pi over 3, and 5 pi over 3, and add 2k pi to each of them. So that's what we've done for the general solution so far. We've found all of our answers from 0 to 2 pi, and then we have just written everything that's coterminal with each of them. I know that 2a said solve to the nearest hundredth, but because we could find exact answers for this, we'll leave our answers that way. So I'm going to just do one more example. Solve for theta. We're going to solve for theta for cos 2 theta equals negative root 3 over 2, just to give us one more chance to see this. So we recognize this as a multi-revolution question because we don't just have a theta inside, we have a 2 theta or a 3 theta or something theta. There's been some sort of horizontal compression that's taken place. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at our domain, and our domain is from 0 to 2 pi, and say if 1 theta is between 0 and 2 pi, then 2 thetas would be between, and you multiply both of these by 2, 0 and 4 pi, which means you're looking around the circle twice, hence the name multi-revolution question. Now that we know that, we can just say, is root 3 over 2 on our unit circle? Yes. What family is that? Pi over 6 family. So we're solving for 2 theta, because that's what's inside. It's going to be the pi over 6 family. What quadrants? Second quadrant and third quadrant. So you'd have 5 pi over 6 and 7 pi over 6. And that's the first time around, from 0 to 2 pi. But for 2 theta, we need to go 2 times around. So on the second time around, if you end at 5 pi over 6, that's going to be 17 pi over 6. And Evan, you've gotten really quick at these. What was your strategy from getting that 17 so quickly? Right. Does it make sense from here to here? You're going one more full time around. So it's like I'm at 5 pi over 6, and I have to go a full time around to get there again. Did I go the wrong direction? Okay, so I'm at 5 pi over 6. I need to go a full time around, so that means I have to add 2 pi. And if I'm adding fractions, I need a common denominator. So 2 pi is the same as 12 pi over 6. So if I know 5 pi over 6, I just have to add 12 to 5, and then I'll get 17 pi over 6. Similarly, with 7 pi over 6, I will get plus 12, 19 pi over 6. And we only need to go around twice because 2 theta is between 0 and 4 pi. Then the final step is to solve for theta. If I'm solving for theta here, I would need to divide by 2. Now, when dealing with fractions, remember that dividing by 2 is the same as multiplying by a half. So when I divide 5 pi over 6 by 2, multiplying by a half is an easier mental math thing to think about. It's going to be 5 pi over 12, 7 pi over 12, 17 pi over 12, and 19 pi over 12. And notice that each of our answers is now between 0 and 2 pi. 2 pi being 24 pi over 12. So 19 pi over 12, our largest answer, is less than 2 pi. And we've got 4 answers between 0 and 2 pi. Okay, question for practice. Or do you want to do one more together? Good. Should we do one where we mess up the beginning domain? Yeah? Okay. I'll do one more. Solve for theta, sine 3 theta equals positive 1/2 from negative pi to pi. So the first thing that we do is we look at our domain and we say if 1 theta is between negative pi and pi, this multi-revolution question would tell us that 3 thetas would be between negative 3 pi and 3 pi. Now, when writing the order, when solving this, sine theta is 1/2. What family is that? Pi over 6. What quadrants? 1 and 2. So I would start by going, there's my answers from 0 to 2 pi. Pi over 6 and 5 pi over 6. And what you're going to find in most questions that we're going to do, you're going to start solving between 0 and 2 pi or 0 and 360 degrees naturally. But now we have to look at what's our domain. We're going from negative 3 pi to 3 pi. So if I'm starting at 0, that would mean I'm going to go from 0 to 3 pi, which is once around, and then another half a time around. Can you see that you would hit pi over 6 and 5 pi over 6 again? So that's going to be 13 pi over 6, adding 12, and 17 pi over 6. But we also have to think about going from 0 to negative 3 pi. So 0 to negative 3 pi would be once around in the negative direction and another half around in the negative direction. Going once around in the negative direction, you're going to hit 5 pi over 6 at, what would that value be? Okay, one thing you can think about is subtracting 12 off of 5, which would give you negative 7 pi over 6. Another thing that I think about when I'm going in the negative direction is if I'm going in the negative direction and ending in quadrant 2, that's like going into the third negative quadrant. Because quadrant 4 is like the first negative quadrant, quadrant 3 is like the second negative quadrant, and quadrant 2 would be the third negative quadrant. So whatever the pi over 6 family member is in the third negative quadrant is going to match up with the pi over 6 family member in the third positive quadrant. So pi over 6 in quadrant 3 is 7 pi over 6. So the negative 1 would be negative 7 pi over 6. And the negative angle coterminal with pi over 6 will be negative 11 pi over 6. So that's once around in the negative direction. We have to go to negative 3 pi, which would be another half time around, but I won't hit anything in those quadrants 3 and 4. So now we have those 6 answers between negative 3 pi and 3 pi. Once you've got your 6 answers, now we can find out what theta is. We're going to have to divide each of those answers by 3, which is the same as multiplying by 1/3. And so they will all be over 18. Okay, try some of these on your own. Question number 10.